Marcus leaned back in his seat, tapping the edge of the sleek black conference table, feeling its cold surface beneath his fingertips. Anxiety was high in the room. Seated around him were the world's wealthiest and most powerful figures, billionaires, heads of state, tech moguls, each one with more influence than the rest of humanity combined. Outside, the world was in chaos. Wildfires scorched the forests, floods wiped out cities, and disease ravaged the population. Society as they knew it was crumbling. Yet here, in this boardroom, there was a sense of calm. It was the quiet that preceded something big, something monumental. Marcus exchanged glances with Ellen, the media tycoon to his right. She gave him a nervous smile, her knuckles white as she gripped the arms of her chair. At the front of the room, a figure stepped into the spotlight, shrouded in the dim glow of the overhead projector. Marcus recognized him immediately. Dr. Fennel, a man whose name had been whispered in elite circles for years. A brilliant scientist, or so the rumors went, though no one could ever quite figure out where he came from or how he had amassed his fortune. Today he was here to deliver a message that would change everything. Fennel cleared his throat, and the room went silent. "As you all know," he began, "the end is closer than any of us anticipated." A murmur swept through the room, but Fennel raised his hand, silencing it. His eyes were hard, his expression severe. "We have 3 days until impact," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. Marcus felt his chest tighten. 3 days. They had heard rumors, of course, whispers about an asteroid hurtling toward Earth, but no one in power had confirmed it. Now, here it was, delivered bluntly by Fennel, as though it were a simple fact of life. "The asteroid is unlike anything we've encountered before," Fennel continued. "It's massive, the size of a small moon. When it hits, Earth will be shattered into fragments. Nothing will survive." There were gasps, some more audible than others. The man to Marcus's left let out a breath he had been holding, and someone farther down the table whispered a curse under their breath. "But," Fennel continued, "there is hope." Marcus straightened in his chair. Hope? That was the word he'd been waiting for. "We have been working on a project, a way out, if you will," Fennel said. "A way to escape the devastation, to survive and to begin again." Marcus's heart raced. He had expected something like this. There were always rumors, conspiracy theories about secret plans to save the elite in the event of an apocalypse. But now it was real. "What kind of escape?" Ellen asked, her voice filled with quiet desperation. "And why us?" Fennel smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the smile of a man who knew more than he was letting on. "Because you are the ones who have the resources, the power, the influence to rebuild. You are the chosen few." He clicked a button, and the screen behind him flickered to life. Images of a gleaming city appeared, towers of glass and steel, verdant fields, endless supplies of food and water. The place was stunning. A utopia floating in the middle of nowhere. "This," Fennel said, "is Mars." There was a stunned silence as the room absorbed the gravity of his words. "Impossible," someone muttered. "Mars is a barren wasteland." "Not anymore," Fennel said smoothly. "We've been working in secret for years. The colony is ready, fully operational. You'll be able to live there indefinitely, free of war, poverty, disease. It's a fresh start." Marcus's mind whirled. He had heard whispers of the Mars colony project before, but nothing concrete. The idea that they had succeeded in transforming the Red Planet into something habitable seemed ludicrous. And yet, here it was, displayed before him in vivid detail. "The asteroid will wipe out all life on Earth," Fennel continued. "But you, those of you in this room, will survive. You'll rebuild. You'll thrive." Marcus glanced around the room. No one spoke, but he could feel the collective greed, the hunger for survival in their eyes. They had worked their entire lives to be at the top. They wouldn't give that up now. "When do we leave?" Ellen asked, her voice filled with quiet desperation. Fennel's smile widened. 3 days, he said. "We'll transport you to the launch site, and from there you'll be taken to Mars. You'll be safe, I assure you." Marcus felt a rush of relief. It was happening. They would escape. They would survive. The rest of humanity would be left to die. But that was inevitable. Not everyone could be saved, and Marcus wasn't about to waste time feeling guilty for being on the winning side. That night, as Marcus returned to his penthouse, he found himself staring out over the city. Below, the streets were filled with chaos, people rioting, looting, desperate to survive the end. None of them knew what was coming. Not really. They didn't know that the world was already lost, that they were already doomed. 3 days. That was all he had to endure. 3 days until salvation. The launch site was a fortress. Hidden deep in a remote desert, it was a sprawling complex, complete with towering spacecraft, each one sleek and black, with an otherworldly hum. Marcus marveled at the sheer size of the operation. It was as though the whole world had been kept in the dark, while the elite quietly prepared to abandon it. As he boarded the ship, Marcus felt a pang of guilt. It was brief, and he pushed it down quickly. He had earned his place here. This wasn't about morality, it was about survival. The journey to Mars was faster than Marcus expected. The ship seemed to defy the laws of physics, moving at a speed that made his stomach turn. One moment they were leaving Earth, and the next, they were descending into Mars's atmosphere. When the ship landed, Marcus stepped out onto the surface, expecting the barren red wasteland he had always associated with the planet. But instead, he was met with rolling green hills, crystal-clear rivers, and a sky that shimmered a deep shade of violet. In the distance, towering cities gleamed under the twin suns. This is incredible, Ellen whispered, standing beside him. Marcus nodded in agreement. It was paradise, everything they had been promised. The first few weeks on Mars were surreal. The wealthy settled into their new lives with ease, each of them granted a palatial estate, complete with servants, endless resources, and luxuries beyond imagination. There was no work to be done, no struggle. It was everything Marcus had dreamed of and more. But then things began to change. It started small. The food, once exquisite, began to taste off, bland, almost stale. The weather, which had been perfectly mild, grew colder each day. The once vibrant colors of the landscape dulled, and the air took on a strange metallic quality. At first, Marcus brushed it off. These were minor inconveniences, nothing to be concerned about. But as the days passed, the changes became harder to ignore. The water tasted strange, the plants began to wither, and the people, his fellow survivors. Then came the whispers. At night, Marcus would hear them. Low, unintelligible murmurs coming from the far corners of his estate. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then he noticed others speaking of the same phenomenon. Whispers, shadows moving just out of sight. The servants, once attentive and eager, now moved silently through the halls, their faces expressionless, their eyes cold. One night, as Marcus sat in his study, he overheard 2 of the servants speaking in hushed tones. "They think they're free," one said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Fools." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He stood, moving closer to the door to listen. "They'll learn soon enough," the other replied. This paradise was never for them. Marcus's heart raced. What did that mean? He had always assumed that they were in control here, that they were the chosen few. But now doubt crept into his mind. He confronted Fennel the next day, but the man only smiled, his eyes cold and distant. "There's nothing to worry about," he said. "Enjoy your new life, Marcus. You've earned it." But the gnawing feeling in Marcus's gut wouldn't go away. Weeks passed, and the decay continued. The utopia they had been promised was unraveling before their eyes. The other survivors grew desperate, demanding answers, but none came. The ships that had brought them here were gone. The communications devices were silent. They were trapped. One night, a massive screen in the center of the city flickered to life. The image of Earth appeared, but it wasn't the shattered, desolate planet they had been shown. Instead, it was thriving. The skies were clear, the waters pristine. People moved through green fields, smiling, working together to rebuild. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. It was a far cry from the apocalypse they had been promised. Instead of a destroyed wasteland, Earth looked better. He could see forests, vast swathes of green land, rivers flowing clean, and communities of people who appeared to be thriving. Then the screen zoomed in on one of the cities. The buildings were crafted from natural materials, their shapes blending with the environment, and the people, who should have been dead, were alive, working together to plant crops, to build, to restore what had been lost. There was laughter, peace, and cooperation. Text flashed across the screen in bold white letters, "Earth thrives without you." A second message appeared below it. You were the problem. The screen flickered again, this time showing a view of space. The asteroid, the catastrophe they had been warned about, was nowhere to be seen. The Earth orbited calmly in the vastness of space, intact. Panic set in among the survivors. Voices rose in confusion, disbelief. Some shouted at the screen, demanding answers, while others stood frozen, staring at the peaceful images of Earth, their supposed tomb flourishing without them. A figure appeared on the screen, humanoid in form but indistinct, its face hidden in shadow. Its voice echoed through the city square. "You believed you were the chosen," the figure said, "but you were only chosen to be removed." Gasps rippled through the crowd as realization set in. "The Earth is healing without your presence," the figure continued. "You were the ones who poisoned it, who waged wars, who hoarded resources. Your time on Earth is over. You will not return." Marcus's stomach dropped. His mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. They had been deceived. This wasn't a new beginning. It was an exile. The screen flickered once more, showing Mars as it truly was, a barren red wasteland with crumbling buildings and dust storms ravaging the empty plains. The beautiful cities they had seen were an illusion. They were trapped here, on a desolate rock, with no way back and no way forward. The figure on the screen spoke one last time. "You were given every chance to change your ways. Now you will live with the consequences." The screen went black. Marcus felt a cold sweat drip down his back. Around him, the crowd began to scream, to panic, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Mars wasn't a paradise, it was a prison. As Marcus stood there, staring at the now blank screen, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. He had believed he was escaping death, escaping the destruction of Earth. But in the end, he had escaped into something far worse, a slow, inescapable demise.